Pretty cool, huh? This is a Birkeland-eyed reactor, and it is doing something that to me is just absolutely amazing. It is producing nitric acid from just electricity, air, and water. Hi, Terry here, and welcome to Times Gone Tech. Okay, so first, where have I been and what have I been doing? Well, other than this, last weekend, 4th of July weekend, actually, when I planned on filming this video, I came down with a severe case of salmonella food poisoning. Yeah, I spent 3 days on my back taking antibiotics and puking. And I have been completely unable to track down the source. You see, the problem with food poisoning is we always blame it on the very last thing we just ate. Oh, I ate something this morning and it made me sick, or I ate something last night and it made me sick today. And it can work that way, except that salmonella can also take anywhere from 3 to 10 days before symptoms start showing up. And then not everyone who is exposed to it even gets sick. So you could be out eating the same food with other people and you can get sick and they can't, or they can get sick and you can't. So the fact is, it could be anything that I ate within the last 2 weeks. And I have no idea what it is, but feeling better now. Thank you for asking. So now, with that out of the way, what in the world is a contraption like this doing on a YouTube channel about black powder and antique muzzle loaders? Well, Times Gone Tech is not actually about only black powder or antique muzzle loaders. It has been lately, but it's actually about any and all technology of the past. Anything, all the way back to Roman and even Stone Age. I actually did a review of the Addle about a year or two ago. Thus the title, Time's Gone. Yeah. But as it turns out, this does have something to do with black powder and antique muzzle loaders. In fact, I think it's fair to say that this, or even this, wouldn't exist without something very much like this. Well, this, the end product, not this, the method. That only dates back to 1903, but nitric acid goes back quite a bit further. The existence of nitric acid was first recorded in 800 AD by the Islamic alchemist, and I know I'm butchering this name and I apologize right up front, Jabir ibn Hayyan. Around the same time, gunpowder was discovered in China. Jabir ibn Hayyan also invented much of the basic glassware still used in chemistry today, like the flask and beaker, just to name two. His works also contain the oldest known systematic classification of chemical substances, and he was, as far as we know, the first person to realize inorganic substances like ammonium chloride can be sensitized from organic sources. So what does that mean? Well, for one, it meant that people didn't have to just hunt for things like potassium nitrate to make gunpowder with. It meant that they could deliberately make an inorganic substance like potassium nitrate from organic substances like manure and urine. Both gunpowder and nitric acid made their way from the East into Europe at the same time during the 13th century. And it's possible medieval alchemists may have known about at least the basic principles of nitration, through which nitrates like fertilizers and explosives are made. But if they did, they either just never managed to put it all together and invent gun cotton and dynamite, or it could be, and I rather prefer this option myself, that at least a few alchemists understood the true potential of nitration all too well, And considering how radically gunpowder was transforming the face of Europe at the time, they wisely took the secret of nitration with them to their graves. But either way, from 800 AD right up until around 1800 AD, gunpowder remained the go-to explosive for, well, everything, actually, from propellants, rocket fuel, to guns, to blasting, mining, warfare, hunting, quarrying, tunneling. I mean, you name it. If it went boom, it was gunpowder. Then in 1784, Henry Cavendish figured out the exact composition and nature of nitric acid, giving it the correct molecular formula of HNO3. He also showed how magnets could be used to shape electric sparks into a disk of plasma, an experiment that was later reproduced by other people as well. He speculated about what was going on, was wrong, of course, and not much happened for the next 200 years. Well, actually, a lot of things happened over 200 years, just not so much with Henry's plasma disk thing. The basic problem was the idea was just too far ahead of the technology at the time. He had the right idea, but electromagnets wouldn't even be invented until 1826. This was 1784. So he had the right idea. It's just that neither he nor anyone else had any idea what to do with it. I mean, they hadn't even figured out what static electricity is yet. Then, in 1827, the German chemist Justin von Liebig discovered that lightning generates nitric oxide and nitrogen dioxide gases with the chemical formula NO and NO2 respectively. He had no idea how that could be used for any practical purpose, but his observation was correct and dutifully noted. Then, right around the turn of the 20th century, a Norwegian scientist by the name of Christian Birkeland finally managed to put it all together and had the brilliant idea of using Cavendish's and Liebig's discoveries for the industrial production of nitric acid for making nitrate fertilizers, which were just starting to be widely used around the world at the time. So Christian had a business partner named Sam Ide. Don't you just love that? A scientist with a business partner? Like, I'll think of the ideas and you pay for them and I'll build them. And in 1903, they built a reactor in Canada to test Christian's idea. This is a photo of their last reactor that was shut down in 1940 and now sits as a piece of sculpture in a park in Europe. Which means, yes, they built a lot more than just one. Birkeland's design used water-cooled electrodes and electromagnets to shape an electric arc into a thin, flat disk of hot plasma inside a closed container, essentially creating a small, continuous lightning bolt shaped into a flat disk. Air was then passed through that disk. Now, my version here omits the electromagnets and doesn't have the disk, but it does essentially the same thing. The electricity jumping from one electrode to the other, forming a kind of Jacob's ladder, actually creates some hot plasma, which burns the nitrogen and oxygen in the air in the jar together to form nitric oxide. As the air cools down away from the plasma, it forms with more oxygen in the jar to form nitrogen dioxide. And that nitrogen dioxide is then drawn off through a tube underneath this table here into the jar, bubbled through water, it forms nitric acid. It actually forms nitrous and nitric acid, the latter decomposing into the former. No, the former decomposing into the latter. Yeah, the former nitrous oxide decomposing into the latter nitric oxide, nitric acid. The former nitrous acid decomposing into the latter nitric acid. Even under the best of conditions, only a small fraction of the nitrogen inside the chamber of the reactor is converted into nitrogen dioxide, and even a very small fraction of that is captured in the water to produce nitric acid. In fact, Birkeland and Ide used 4 bubbling towers, each 4 stories tall, just to try and capture as much nitrogen dioxide as possible, and they still lost around 2%. And that's what's a little difficult for me to really wrap my head around. Because the one thing about this reactor that really impresses me is just how low powered it is. I mean, this thing is generating great gobs of nitrogen dioxide gas, and yet, I mean, look at it. It looks like something you buy at Spencer's Gifts, not, I mean, when I first turned it on, I expected something more powerful looking, more intimidating, more scary, more Star Wars-ishy. Not this anemic little buzzy Spencer's Gift kind of thing. In fact, when my wife first saw it, she even asked if she could touch it. And yet it is producing nitric acid. And one way for me to test that is to take a sample out of the jar and try it with some baking soda. And I don't know if you will see this. See that bubbling in there? Well, it's not very much, not very strong, but it is showing some acidity. Very mild, but it's there. And another way is if I turn the airflow off on this for about 15 minutes or so, and you can see the nitrogen dioxide gas building up. Now, I'm not going to make you sit here and watch this thing run for 15 minutes. I'll cut it back and come back when 15 minutes is up. Trust me. Now, where have I heard that before? Okay, I'm back now, and can you see the reddish brownish kind of haze starting to form inside this jar? And it's actually feeling pretty warm. It's generating a lot of heat. That's nitrogen dioxide gas. If I let this run, this would turn kind of a reddish brown color. Right now, it's just a very light, hazy color. You can't tell it so much because the morning sunlight's shining in on it. But yeah, once that sun gets up and you lose that direct sunlight, it becomes pretty obvious. Now, this much nitrogen dioxide is being pumped through this jar every 15 minutes. That's a lot of nitrogen dioxide. In fact, let me get the pump back on. So that much nitrogen dioxide is going through the tube here, up and down into this jar every 15 minutes. Now, exposure to daylight destroys nitric acid, so I normally keep it covered with this aluminum foil. And like so. And this thing is incredibly dangerous. Here, let me adjust this and show you. There. Okay. So let me step through just real quickly how this works. In fact, let me get the... We start here at the power supply. Now this is a Carlin oil igniter, and it's actually for a water heater. It generates 20,000 volts, I believe, at 30 milliamps, and uses about 40 watts of electricity. That passes through these copper wires here, which I'm keeping my distance because 20,000 volts has a pretty good jump range, and as you can see, there's no insulation on them whatsoever. That goes up through into the jar where it forms a Jacob's ladder. As you can see through the haze forming here, air is pumped in here from this pump. It comes out down here underneath the jar and then goes in through the bubble jar where it slowly dissolves into the water, forming nitric acid. And as pretty as this thing might look running, I wouldn't touch it. It's 20,000 volts running through that. I mean, that's easily enough to stop a human heart. Easily. In fact, I've only got it sitting out here in the open for the video. Once I'm finished filming, I'm going to put this back up in a corner where it's safe, out of the way, and I'm going to put a barricade up around it. And I don't have any kids living here either, so that helps also. So, obvious question is, could this be used to produce nitric acid commercially today? No. Well, not something like this anyway. This is way too inefficient. This thing has been running nonstop for a week, and it's maybe as strong as vinegar, maybe, if even that strong. But with some refinement, a smaller version of the Birkelandite reactor could potentially be economically feasible today. The idea is just as sound today as it was back in 1903, if not more so. In fact, it's really not correct to think of the Birkelandite reactor as being inefficient or as being a failure. It was somewhat inefficient compared to the amount of energy required to put into it. But, of course, electricity wasn't produced as efficiently in 1903 as it is today, not even hydroelectric power. And, of course, they did not have computer control technology. They did not have modern plastics and advanced ceramic technology and things like that. So, a lot could be done. As I had mentioned earlier, there was at one time 35 reactors running across Europe in a factory. So what happened? Well, another process came along called the Ostwald process, which produces the same amount of nitric acid for less energy put into it. So it's a little more economically feasible, and it just slowly won out, and the Birkelandite reactors were just slowly shut down. The last one was shut down in 1940, and it's now a piece of park sculpture. But there is a renewed interest in the technology, in the idea, on a smaller scale today. Farmers co-ops, for example, are using wind and solar energy sources with much more efficient designs on a small scale to produce nitrate fertilizers for use on the farms. So while it's likely that the Birkelandite process may never make a large-scale commercial comeback, it's probably never actually going to go away either. And what has all this got to do with cap and ball technology? What's it got to do with antique muzzleloaders? Well, in 1800, which I'll go into later in more detail in another video, somebody discovered that by dissolving mercury in 70% strength nitric acid and kicking it with a little ethyl alcohol, produced what we call mercury fulminate, which was used in percussion caps and gun primers for something like about a little over 100 years, from around 1822 up until 1932, when lead azide was discovered, which is also based on nitric acid. And then, of course, there's nitroglycerin and nitrocellulose, which makes modern smokeless powder, which was invented actually in the 1840s and then released commercially in the 1880s. And it also is based on nitric acid. So nitric acid really ushered in the modern world. The American Industrial Revolution likely would never have happened without nitric acid. Nitroglycerin produced by nitric acid blasted the tunnels through the Rocky Mountains, which allowed the Transcontinental Railroad to link the East and West United States for the very first time. Dynamite itself revolutionized quarrying, mining, commercial construction. You know, it's been said that without explosives, the modern world as we know it simply would not exist. And all of that was based on nitric acid. So it's very likely that without nitric acid, instead of shooting these or these, we'd still be shooting these and riding horses on dirt roads and cooking over a wood fire. The reactions that are available, possible, and the products that can be made with nitric acid are just amazing. I mean, they just go on and on and on. So you stop bad mouthing nitric acid. I wonder where I could find a business partner. Well, it worked out okay for Christian Berkland.